Hey, it's Debbie, and I am doing a podcast to go back in time. As I share my story, life is not a race, it is a journey. I'm doing some seminars coming up, and I am working on sharing how chronic stress impacts whole you, external stressors, and hidden sources of chronic stress that we don't know about inside unless we run functional lab testing to reveal what's actually going on under the hood. I wanted to put together a blog and share here on the video because there's some great images. So I did a podcast audio version that's on the podcast channel, but I wanted to go through all the notes here on the YouTube channel because of these great infographics. I need visual aids. So I'm going to share my screen. If you know of anyone struggling with unexplained weight gain, chronic fatigue, gut issues, dysbiosis, problems with diarrhea or constipation, it's just your body's all in confusion. Metabolic chaos is what we call it as an FDN practitioner. So I look at what are sources of chronic stress external? What can we control? What can we do better at managing? Work on looking at our nutrition, our exercise. Are you exercising too much? Are you overtraining and under recovering? Are you doing enough strength training, building versus breaking down? Catabolic is breaking down, anabolic building. We want to figure out what is best for me. Debbie might look different of a routine, program, lifestyle habits that needs to be designed for you. So, nutrition and exercise is a part of it. But if you don't manage your sleep and manage your stress, all the efforts that you're doing with nutrition and exercise are perhaps causing more damage than good. If you feel that you're taking one step forward, you're feeling your best, and then two steps back, you're just kind of in this cycle of never really moving forward. So, looking at the stress management is key. Strategies to deal with stressors that you can't control. What can you do with stressors that are chronic inside under the hood? How do you resolve them? We need to identify them first and then get a personalized program. What do we do about digestion? So it's not just what we eat, but how are you eating? Are you eating super fast? Are you one of those people at dinner or at a meal that I take a couple bites and you're already clearing off your plate and you're scraping your plate off, eating super fast, like rushing to get to something? Take pause, reset, and reboot before you eat if you want proper digestion. If you want to work on gut health, let's start with what foods work best for you, and then properly chew your food, digest your food. And then do you have a leak in your gut that undigested food is seeping out? The borders are broken and the boundary is broken and the enemies get out. So we want to look at what is best for us. So let's share this journey on how chronic stress can impact the whole you with other people that you know that are struggling. All right, let me share my screen and we're going to dive into signs and symptoms of high cortisol and low cortisol. I feel that this is more impactful if you look at the video presentation versus listening. So let's look at first, back up. I found some definitions if you want to look at this from my clevelandclinic.org. What is HPA axis dysfunction? So we might say, just to simplify it, adrenal fatigue, adrenal exhaustion. How does signs and symptoms of high and low cortisol start? So we want to look at what is cortisol and how is it released, and that to always work backwards. Hypothalamus talks to pituitary gland, and sends signal to the adrenal gland to respond. So what this says from Cleveland Clinic is that chronic stress can lead to HPA axis dysfunction and cause consistently increased cortisol levels in your body. This increases your risk for a variety of health conditions that we'll go into in my blog notes. Immune system dysfunction, autoimmune conditions, increased inflammation throughout the body, mental health conditions, mood disorders, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, metabolic diseases as diabetes, obesity, cancer, cardiovascular diseases as high blood pressure, and vascular damage. HPA axis dysfunction may also play a role in memory loss, neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer's. HPA axis function is completely something we can work on. It's a complex physiological concept. Research, they say, is still studying its causes and health impacts. So in the Cleveland Clinic, they say, what is the treatment for HPA axis? There's no direct treatment for HPA axis function, but researchers are actively studying how to target certain conditions. So this is traditional medicine, I think more so than what we know as nutritional therapy practitioners. When we look at PubMed, when we look at FDN practitioners, we're going to go through all this information and everything will be on my blog page. Now, I know there are solutions. So when you go to a doctor and they say everything's normal, you're fine. This is why I saw 8 different people trying to get help. I was trying to get results by just supplementing. I was doing the functional lab tests, get the supplements, and not get anywhere because I did not do the whole, what I call the holistic method, working on what we say is FDN practitioners, the DRESS protocol: diet, rest, exercise, stress management, and S for supplements, where you need to fill in the imbalances. So if you're struggling to get your vibrant self back again, your body, you don't feel yourself, everything is just kind of off and you feel like you're going downhill. Don't think there's no solutions, as we looked over here from the Cleveland Clinic, that there is a condition, but is there a solution? So the main function, they say, as HPA axis is to release cortisol. This kicks off short-term bodily changes that allow you to respond to stress. The stress response is autonomic, and your adrenal medulla system is tightly connected to HPA axis and stress system. So the adrenal medulla releases adrenaline, epinephrine in some places, in times of stress. We'll talk about that, to trigger fight or flight, or some people say fight, freeze, or flight. Now, the human body, they say, is designed to experience stress and react to it. When you face changes or challenges, stressors externally, your body makes short-term physical mental response to adjust. The stress response can be positive, keeping us alert, motivated, ready to avoid danger, safety, stay safe, but chronic long-term stress can damage our bodies. So, yes, they acknowledge in here, but they say, well, what do we do about it? What is the treatment? No direct treatment because there's not a pill. Okay, so we need to look at the progressions of HPA axis, and then how do you go from elevated cortisol to low cortisol? Actually, I should pull up my Dutch test. Debbie, pause and see if that helps for explanation. But I've gone through, see the lab testing I've shared on my previous podcast, how we can look at lab testing to identify what to do. But I want you to see some information on signs and symptoms, and then ideally get tested before you have these red flags. Ideally, we're health optimizers, getting ourselves through functional lab testing once a year at least, ideally quarterly, but twice a year, we should be getting a Dutch test, a food sensitivity test, a microbiome gut stool test, a complete blood chemistry panel, as with Function Health I'm using now, and look at our response to stressors and identify them. Another test is great if you can do a bunch of tests, are the organic acids test. So let's go through the initial response to feeling stress. So the HP axis was when we respond to stress. Remember, emotional, environmental, financial, internal can be chronic inflammation, nutrient deficiencies. But when the HP axis is activated, this leads to release of cortisol. So as we just said, prolonged or chronic stress can disrupt normal functioning of the HP axis, leading to progression of dysfunction that can ultimately lead to low levels of cortisol. So it's in phases, higher than optimal and then lower. So when we're looking at the first phase in response to acute or chronic stress, the HP axis system is activated. Stressors, again, it could be work, internal inflammation, maybe blood sugar imbalances from eating too much sugar, but also stress will cause your blood sugar to go up, trigger the hypothalamus to release the corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. Then this stimulates pituitary gland to release the adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. And then that signals adrenal glands to produce and release cortisol. So there's some pictures in here I put in. Hypothalamus sends signal to pituitary gland to the ACTH to the adrenal gland. Then the adrenal gland releases cortisol, and then we get cortisol in our circulation. So we've got signs and symptoms of high cortisol. So we'll go over this a few times. But if you're feeling nonstop, I always think of it as a faucet. If your faucet is dripping, you didn't turn that water faucet all the way off, keeps dripping. Over time, we get that chronically elevated cortisol. This can lead to negative issues. As increased energy alertness is good temporarily, you might have an increase, well, you will have increase in blood sugar leading to weight gain if it's all the time. Abdominal fat area is typical. Poor sleep quality due to elevated cortisol at night. That's why I really need to find this Dutch test. So let me pull this up. Hold on, let me see my reports. So read that while I find this. Please hold. And I can't see anything with the lighting in here, but the main report I want to show the cortisol rhythm of the day. We'll get to that. But reduced digestion, lack of blood flow, it's being redirected from the digestive system out to the extremities to respond to that stress, which we'll talk about how that's exercise too. Weakened immune system, we can go into deeper chronic inflammation, suppression, irritability, anxiety, and agitation. So when I started to have symptoms, 2013, I had to look back of seeing, okay, where did I have high cortisol symptoms? Because I started finally pay attention to my symptoms when I was low cortisol. So I ignored all those symptoms, had no idea at the time that I was going through that. So now we go to prolonged stress. So say you're me, which is why I'm on a mission to help you avoid going to this next phase. Chronic exposure to stress, HPA axis becomes dysregulated. The body's in a continuous state of fight or flight. And this is why I like clients to use heart rate variability testing as with Sweetbeat. So we're identifying the nervous system balance. So we look at the low frequency, high frequency, not just the number. It's like looking at your cholesterol, not looking at the breakdown, the type of LDL particle size. Same thing, but different. Your HRV, we want to look at LF to HF ratio. Low frequency, sympathetic nervous system. High frequency, parasympathetic nervous system. Are you stuck over in the sympathetic nervous system, being in a continuous state of fight or flight with persistently elevated cortisol levels? So then your adrenal gland, the HPA axis specifically, becomes overstimulated. This messaging keeps happening that we just went over, the H to the P to the A, and cortisol is released. So it's not just the adrenal glands, is why we don't say adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion, because you got to work backwards and work north. It's the hypothalamus. So leading to this overstimulation, eventually you start to feel fatigue because your body's in constant demand for cortisol production. So in this phase, we start to experience stress overload. The initial response of high cortisol no longer serves as an effective defense, similar to what insulin resistance is about, if you've learned that. The body is this feedback loop. So it regulates cortisol levels through a negative feedback mechanism: when to stop, turn it on, stop, turn it on. We have this body's innate intelligence, but when we do something too much, similar to, again, insulin, we become insulin resistant to that alert that our blood sugar's up, insulin needs to be released. With cortisol, the HPA axis gets tired and the feedback loop is impaired. Dysregulation, excessive cortisol secretion, this can lead to now high cortisol levels, where we're still in this phase, increased fat storage. Often it's said we get more fat storage in the belly because of cortisol's role in stimulating insulin and promoting fat storage and where the receptors are. We can see an impaired metabolic function, including, as I've talked many times about, how this can be related to insulin resistance and blood sugar dysregulation. We have gut dysfunction. We'll dive into a lot about how this leads to leaky gut. So chronic stress can be a reason, a contributor to your leaky gut, which contributes to chronic inflammation in the body, systemic inflammation. Cortisol impairs digestion and blood flow into the gut, and we get a depleted immune function, and then we have chronic inflammation, and this makes us more susceptible to illnesses, infections, autoimmune disorders, which is interesting as I pay attention to my family's parents, friends that are aging, and how many people keep getting sick. And you wonder if it's because their immune system is depleted because of this chronic inflammation. They're not stressful, they're retired and they're having fun living life in Palm Desert and traveling, but internal sources of chronic stress could be contributing to this, right? So we need to look at the whole picture. So we always say zoom out before you zoom in, and don't just treat some lab results based on what's higher or lower. So we want to look at this whole picture, because the body is, again, incredibly intelligent. We have innate intelligence. And if we just continued just ignoring those symptoms, you're going to have that persistent fatigue, tired but wired. You're always feeling edgy. You have digestion issues, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, increased belly fat, difficulty losing weight. You can't fall asleep, or maybe the other pattern is you can't stay asleep. You're wide awake middle of the night. That's what happened to me. Your heart rate is elevated. That's what happened to me when I started to pay attention. My heart rate, I always wore a heart rate monitor for all this time. And when I started to get my big red flags, I didn't know what was going to happen to me a few weeks later after I was doing a 50K trail run, and my heart rate was very elevated. And I know I've trained again for like 25 years with heart rate strep. So I know what it feels like, and it was very odd. And high blood pressure, mood swings, anxiety, depression. Okay, so how do we get from high cortisol to low cortisol? So you can go into your Google search and go type in HPA axis dysfunction or progression. Let's type of that. So progression chart. So we want to look at here, go to the images, and then you'll see all these great images if you want to learn more. I like looking at this one. Whoops, where'd I go? So if we click here, this is what we use in FDN practitioner programs. So here's a better visual. Normal acute stress is similar to, think you lift weights. You break down your muscle, When you are not exercising, you're in recovery mode and your body's repairing and rebuilding. You adapted to that stress. When you do cold shower, cold plunge for 2 minutes, you adapt. It's acute stress. When you do sprint interval training, say you're doing 20-second sprints upstairs that I'm doing later today, you adapt to it. When that gets to be back to back to back to back, all those stressors are never ending, that leaky faucet, we get to be in acute distress. We have those signs and symptoms of elevated, higher than optimal cortisol. Okay, so then compensatory phase, here's your cortisol, should be in this happy place. Cortisol, acute stress up here. Now we have elevated cortisol. You don't pay attention to those red flags as myself, and then suddenly you wake up and you go, okay, I cannot do anything. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm an emotional mess. I have no energy to go for any workout. I'm depressed. I can't sleep at night. I am gaining weight for no reason. And it just suddenly I gained 30 pounds. This compensatory phase is what I discovered when I had issues. I was over here. My mission is to help you know when you get here. When you get just right over here, and then you realize, oh, I'm doing too much. I need to stop, pause, reset, reboot my body system. Let's shift back here. You can do that. We have innate intelligence. We have red flags. Our body's sending us these signals. Pay attention. Okay. So then let's go to low cortisol. Chronic fatigue, tiredness, even after resting, you just can't get any energy. Your low motivation, lack of energy to handle any normal daily activity, brain fog, difficulty concentrating. You feel overwhelmed easily. You can't deal with life. You have poor stress resilience. You get dizzy when you stand up really quickly. You have low blood pressure. Frequent infections due to suppressed immune system. Hormone imbalances. Now we've got the thyroid connection, low thyroid function. Your period, your menstrual cycle's off, and you have zero sex drive, low libido. So we have these images here. Again, I found this online to different research. The fight or flight response. We have these alarm warning signals. Hypothalamus is getting that alarm message saying, respond to this emergency. We're under attack. All right, we need to be safe. I need my person to be safe. Then the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland, number 2 here. And then we have the pituitary gland sending that hormone response to ACTH to the adrenal. Now, keep in mind, when we go into all of this, I need to do this in phases. The pituitary gland sends out thyroid hormones, your sex hormones. So what do you think happens when your body is prioritizing safety? Safety first. Let's put the oxygen mask on you first. The adrenals are releasing cortisol to respond to that threat, to that emergency. Everything else is put on pause, put on hold. So trying to understand the mechanism of action. How does this all happen? How does this happen? I don't know about it. We need to pay attention. As we say FDN, we call this metabolic chaos. The progression of high cortisol to low cortisol is a key feature in what we say metabolic chaos. So somewhere I have a picture of metabolic chaos. We'll get there. So now I just lost my spot. Vernal, adrenal, here we go. So metabolic chaos, systemic dysfunction, body's hormonal, metabolic, immune, digest, all of our systems are imbalanced during prolonged stress and cortisol. So again, if I go to my nice Google search, now we're going to look up metabolic chaos. And we want to say, hey, what is metabolic chaos? We can click on this and see which ones you want to look at. View file. Hey, it comes from me. What is metabolic chaos? So what we say, and as FDN practitioners, Reed Davis created the term metabolic chaos, but we have all these imbalances in your body system. So that image is pretty fuzzy when I zoom out. So we'll go back here. Metabolic disruption. So here we go again. Chronic high cortisol leads to insulin resistance, fat storage, blood sugar imbalances, contributing to weight gain around the belly and difficulty losing weight. Think of cortisol, insulin. It's a great teeter-totter I had a picture of in my slides. Insulin's up, cortisol's up. We have this imbalance. So we want to pay attention to why this is happening to us. I always wonder why me? Why do other people not have this problem? So then I got into genetics too, to look at what is going on with my genetics, why other people can tolerate more stress. But it's accumulation. I, at the time, was running a fitness studio, 10 years. It should have been just 5 years. And I just dug myself into a deep hole emotionally, probably physically, financially. It was a constant stressor for me running a business all on my own, trying to do everything on my own, on top of competing, trying to win my age group in triathlons, more long distance endurance events as Ironman. So chronic high cortisol leads to all this metabolic chaos. But then we continue on. Low cortisol impairs stress response, reducing the body's ability to maintain balance and to respond to stressors effectively, which can lead to burnout and fatigue. Now, I want to bring in this whole leaky gut thing. Gut dysfunction. So go back to high cortisol. This is impairing digestive function by reducing blood flow to the gut and disrupting gut permeability. We call this gut permeability, leaky gut, where the intestinal lining becomes porous. Think of the cheesecloth Dr. Tom O'Brien talks about, allowing toxins and undigested food particles now are leaking into the bloodstream, causing inflammation and immune system activation. So over time, this dysfunction can contribute to autoimmune diseases and systemic inflammation. And this is where we're going to go the next level. This is why I go down rabbit holes, because I just don't like stopping there. Okay, they do this. It causes this. It contributes to this. If you want to know more as myself, I want to know, well, how does that work? What's the mechanism of action? Just don't tell me that causes leaky gut. I need to, in my brain, to understand how. And the immune system. Prolonged high cortisol suppresses the immune system, leaving the body vulnerable to chronic infections and autoimmune conditions. As cortisol levels drop during adrenal fatigue, as we progress, the immune system begins to be suppressed, and this increases our risk for being more sick frequently and chronic inflammation. And then we've talked about hormones a lot lately, but high cortisol can disrupt the balance between other hormones as thyroid. So we want to look at reverse T3. The thyroid gets the brakes put on as we focus on responding to that threat emergency and put us into safety. Sex hormones, this can lead to PMS, low libido, menstrual irregularities for females, and insulin resistance can be a result as well. So we want to look at the whole you, the HP axis, looking at metabolic chaos. This is why I look at the whole person externally, internally, because we get this disruption of internal hidden sources of chronic stress. Hidden stands for H is hormones, I immune system, D digestion, other D detoxification, energy, and it could be endocrine system too there, and nervous system. So we want to look at the whole person. Again, chronic stress and cortisol dysregulation lead to problems not just with your HB axis, your adrenals, but your thyroid and sex hormones and insulin. And this affects everything from metabolism to your mood to reproductive health. I never could have children, couldn't get pregnant, tried, and I had to do the IVF and I decided not to spend all that money. But metabolic chaos is a thing. And so sometimes we need to start with identifying those external stressors and maybe go backwards. What are those stressors that you're holding in, looking at childhood, growing up, traumatic events that have impacted your health by creating this chronic stress that you might not know about because you dug it down, you pushed it down so deep. Those emotions are shoved down. We need to figure out what those are and bring them up to the surface. Metabolic dysfunction is related to the insulin resistance, fat storage, difficulties with weight management, and this can be relationship with dysregulation in cortisol. And then we'll go into, again, the leaky gut, impaired digestion, nutrient deficiencies all contribute to gut dysbiosis and immune dysfunction, and how cortisol's role in suppressing inflammation becomes a role of too much of anything, right? So you get cortisone shot, you're suppressing inflammation. But remember the Goldilocks effect for everything. Too much, too little. You need the right amount. So if you're doing something all the time, you're raising cortisol, contributing to chronic inflammation. And keep in mind, this autoimmune disease, we're going to dive into this a lot more. How that can be autoimmune disease is related to leaky gut, and work backwards. How's leaky guts? How do you get leaky gut? Where is it coming from? So work up to the root cause approach. And it's not just one thing. So mental emotional health is big. Mood, anxiety, depression. Because the dysregulation of cortisol can make an impact on the neurotransmitter production, serotonin, dopamine in your gut, connect to mood, anxiety, and depression issues. So as FDN practitioners, we identify external, internal stressors contributing to that. We can do the functional lab testing to identify the inflammation, the gut health, nutrient deficiencies, working on your external stressors, and then balancing your body out. So looking at root causes is personalized nutrition, your lifestyle, target supplementation. So you're not just taking all these random things that you heard about on social media and YouTube, but you're looking at what your body needs today to recalibrate, repair, and bring it back to balance to the body's own innate intelligence, where we find homeostasis. So rebalancing the HPA system, restoring cortisol levels, rebuilding your health from the inside out. This allows the body to regain resiliency and return to a state of homeostasis, where the metabolic systems function at optimal level, energy is restored, and the body can recover from stress. So really funny, I put this in the blog post, so you can find this in the blog and YouTube, but this is Brad Kearns and I think 2015, when I was finished my book, and he interviewed me at my house. And yeah, it's kind of funny. And that's cortisol face. My face, I was 30 pounds heavier. So it was fatty face for me. But read that. It's pretty funny. So we'll continue, but that's just what I wanted to share today. Give you a little glimpse of my chronic stress Life is Not a Race series. So let me know your experiences, your struggles, your questions, and I'll put them in the next one. We'll talk about autoimmune, connection with leaky gut with cortisol, and then insulin resistance, and how exercise contributes to that as well. So too much exercise will create leaky gut. So good to know all this information.